Hello everyone, and welcome to this video in which we are going to be looking at the Oracle Discipline Beast changes headed our way in the 12.1 patch cycle in a Mythic Plus dungeon healing environment. Now, I've already played, I would say, like 5 to 10 hours of Oracle Discipline Priest in M+ on PTR, so I have a reasonably well-established understanding of how these changes actually play out. Now, the community consensus around the changes seems to be very negative, and I think in part that negativity is justified. But having played the spec for quite a while already, I must say that I nonetheless quite enjoy it. So there are also some strong points to counteract the definitely existing negative developments around Discipline Priest. But before we get into that, I want to apologize in advance for what you're about to see, as this is a pug group on a PTR server, so things are bound to not go well. I mean, the key goes well enough, but yeah, there's definitely some pain points here, which shall not detract from the quality of the video, I would say, because yeah, what better way to test Discipline Priest's healing than to put the class under some real pressure and see how well it can deal with that pressure. Now, to start with, the main change, I would say, from a gameplay perspective to Discipline Priest is that your Void Shield is now activatable via Mind Blast. So you can gain a proc. You can see I cast Mind Blast right here. I immediately gain a proc of Void Shield. And then beyond that your Void Shield has 2 charges to it. So you can stack 2 charges of Void Shield on top of each other, which can be useful, very useful actually, for preparing for some high incoming damage events, which you can then anticipate in advance. Ideally gain 2 stacks of Void Shield beforehand, and if you want to go beyond that even, you can have 2 stacks of Void Shield available, because the stack lasts for a minute, so you're really not under a lot of pressure to actually consume it. You can have 2 stacks available, and additionally have a Mind Blast off cooldown to be able to generate a 3rd one immediately. So in terms of preparing for some major incoming damage events, that significantly amplifies the agency which Discipline Priests have over their healing delivery. Because beforehand, in the last season, or the current season still, you were sort of you were dependent on actually gaining the Void Shield procs, and if you didn't get them during high damage phases, then your response capability was somewhat limited. And this new way of having sort of a deterministic pathway to acquiring Void Shield procs and being able to hold them when they are not currently needed is quite potent. That being said, it does come with a relatively major caveat, and this is, in my opinion, also the main drawback of Discipline Priests in this new season, and that is that your ability to apply atonements to your team is severely limited now. As in the current season, you are able to apply atonement via penance, so you can just cast a defensive penance and the target will get atonement, and that is no longer the case. And this is also, in my opinion, the main problem Discipline Priests have right here. As you can see, we cannot, as a priest, I cannot dispel the totem curse, and all of us have just 1% HP. Now, shield comes in extremely handy here, because if you have a shield for your entire HP bar, then it's not that big of a deal that you have only 1% HP. But yeah, you can already see that this pull, the tank's just been a little bit over-optimistic. I suppose if I had a Curse Dispel, this would have been doable. We do have a mage, but unfortunately he didn't dispel, or I didn't notice. So yeah, we do wipe here. Generally, this tank is probably training for MDI or something. So this will not be the first or the last pull that is a little bit larger than it would need to be. But anyway, back to the point about penance. Because penance no longer applies atonement, you don't have any spells that reliably apply Atonement outside of Radiance. Yeah. So of course you can cast Radiance a lot, and I think that's what it will come down to always have one charge of Radiance off cooldown to be able to uphold Atonement on the group. And that's something we have sort of unlearned during the last season, because Radiance costs a lot of mana, and obviously it still does, but I think its use will be more required now. So in the last season we sort of juggled around with Penance targeting different players, applying Atonement that way, and also via Power Word Shield. And the Penance part of the equation is now gone, and you can essentially now only apply Atonement via Power Word Shield or via Flash Shield / Shadowmend, which we'll get to in a second. And this means that all of your Atonement application buttons are very mana intensive, and you don't really have a good way for maintaining Atonements on your team without consuming that mana. And this pushes us in the direction of having to use Void Shield for Atonement applications, because obviously Void Shield applies Atonement to 3 players simultaneously, which in terms of Atonement application is very efficient. The problem is that this gameplay requirement around having to use Void Shield for applying Atonement, because you no longer can do so via Penance, means that the whole stick around holding Void Shield procs for difficult healing scenarios is somewhat invalidated by the fact that you actually, you should use it for applying Atonements. But arguably, it can be solved more effectively via Radiance than I have done it here. So yeah, it might come down to just having to use Radiance a lot, which, as I said, we didn't do that much in the previous season. Beyond that, one of the major changes to Discipline Priests is that Shadowmend is now no longer a proc from Shadow Word Pain, and instead is just simply a replacement for Flash Heal. And yeah, I think there's good and there's bad about that. One of the good things is that your Surge of Light procs are becoming significantly more meaningful somehow. In the last season, when you had a Surge of Light proc and you also had a Shadowmend proc, the Surge of Light proc was... Surge of Light is your instant cast Flash Heal, by the way, which you get from casting Smite and your other healing abilities. If you had a Surge of Light proc and you also had a Shadowmend proc available at the same time, this meant that you essentially were disincentivized from consuming the Surge of Light proc if there was not a target that was very low. And now that your Shadowmend is significantly weaker and it's basically just a somewhat amped up version of Flash Heal, it's much easier to start consuming these procs than it was before, as nobody is gathering the mushrooms. And yeah, we are running into some trouble here because people are completely ignoring the mechanics. And one of the main problems actually in situations like these where damage is very high is that you can get an additional Void Shield proc by casting Mind Blast, but if you do that, the global for using Mind Blast doesn't do any healing. So that's really a strategic challenge now that has emerged with the new season for Discipline Priests to sort of, in high damage scenarios, just squeeze a Mind Blast in a situation where you actually would need a lot of healing, but Mind Blast doesn't do any healing. So you can only then heal with the Power Word, with the Void Shield that comes after the fact. As once again, I don't know what happened, so I would have thought that people would have learned from the first problem that we had for not gathering the mushrooms, but in the second attempt it was actually even worse. Not really helped by the fact that Discipline Priest can't dispel any poisons, which would make this a little bit easier, because then I could just gather them on my own and then dispel the poison from me. Generally, I think, that's a bit of a drawback for Discipline Priests in the current season, is your inability to spell curses and poisons. So, because from what I've seen so far, and bleeds of course, there's a lot of curses and poisons and bleeds. A bit of a toolkit deficiency which we have for Discipline Priests here. Alright, I've skipped ahead here a little bit to save you from the pain of having to watch us tickle the boss into the ground with 3 players, one of which, I'm looking at the mage, still hasn't learned any of the mechanics, so it's just the tank and me gathering all the mushrooms, which, yeah, it's a bit of a strange behavior on a PTR if you're sort of testing the dungeons but then not trying to learn any of the mechanics. Anyway, back to Shadowmend. Shadowmend's power is still quite strong. So considering that healers have been diminished in their healing by 25% across the board, I would say Shadowmend's reduction in power is lower than I would have thought it would be. So pressing the ability is still quite powerful. I would say it's maybe 40% as powerful as it used to be. But it used to be very powerful. Yeah, you could just instantly top players with it. So it's definitely still a very satisfying button to press, and you can press it all the time. But this is obviously also one of the main traps you can run into as a Disciplined Priest, is pressing the button all the time, because then you will run out of mana very, very quickly. But if you adhere by the same standards of play as we do in the current season, which is use Flash Heal and Shadowmend only when they are required and don't use them when you don't have to, then I must say I haven't really experienced any major drawbacks from the new Shadowmend in the current season, and I haven't really experienced any major mana issues as Disciplined Priest either. So I think from a mana management perspective, the spell is the spec is still in a decent place. Obviously, Disciplined Priest is one of the specs, is currently and will be in the future, that can have a lot of mana trouble. But it really is about playing the spec correctly and obviously not running into too many scenarios where you just can't keep up with the healing with your normal rotation, which can happen if someone overpulls, for example, and we will have more of these situations in this dungeon as well. But from broadly speaking, I think mana management is decent, and you can also see that the added Void Shield procs which we have available really put a lot of power onto the group. Yeah, it's almost, if you look at the party frames, it's almost the War Within level shielding which is going on the party, which actually can feel quite satisfying. And yeah, so I really like the Void Shield changes going around, but it also strongly changes the whole rotational setup which you run as a Disciplined Priest. So I just made a guide about Disciplined Priests where I rave about the Shadow Word Pain interactions, and obviously no longer having Shadowmend proc from Shadow Word Pain and it just being a base spell now removes those interactions entirely. And you can I'm still running the old rotation here, which is at the start of a pull, Shadow Word Pain on an enemy, immediately Penance to spread Shadow Word Pain to get your procs rolling. I mean, Shadow Word Pain still procs Power of the Dark Side, but that was never its main purpose, and and it still does Atonement healing. So I would say spreading Shadow Word Pain is still important, but the rotation at the start of the pull is changed insofar as that you always want to cast Mind Blast first now to proc your Void Shield immediately, and then follow up the Mind Blast with Shadow Word Pain, and then the first Penance to spread Shadow Word Pain around. And because this Penance will then already reduce the cooldown on your next Mind Blast via your set bonus, which is sort of the main interaction going around between Penance and Mind Blast. So you still want to cast Penance on cooldown, even if it doesn't apply any Atonement, even if there's nothing to heal with it, first of all for damage on the enemies, but then primarily also to reduce the cooldown of your next Mind Blast to maximize the number of Void Shields which you will have available during the dungeon. As we go into this area of the dungeon here with the winds blowing around. Now they have changed this area of the dungeon quite a bit. If you remember from the leveling experience, there were some ice bombs coming down from the ceiling, and if you got the imprisoned, so if you got the movement removal prison, however you want to call it, and then at the same time the ice bombs were dropping from the ceiling, then you would just get one shot. And that's no longer the case, which I think is an extremely welcome change here, because that could be very frustrating if people just didn't focus the prisons. You'll see what I mean in a minute here. I'm not exactly sure which enemy is doing them, probably in the next pack. Yeah, so generally I would say, from what I've seen about the dungeons, they have made a lot of really welcome and really good changes to them. And yeah, I think it's a relatively smooth experience all around. And also the healing changes, in general, I would say healing does feel weaker now, but also not really, because you have a lot more time to heal the players up. So there really isn't much bursty damage going around anymore. There's a lot of healing absorbs, there's a lot of sort of ticking damage and so on, but there's very little burst damage. So healers, and especially Discipline Priest, I would say, because the rotation is so formulaic, are becoming increasingly aligned with damage dealers in terms of their rotation. But maybe we get back to that in a second, as we have another one of the crazy pulls here from the tank. And yeah, we move into this corner here, and now Discipline Priest healing is getting tested a lot. So this is then a situation where you have to spam Shadowmend a lot, and there's really not that much you can do about it. Going for an ultimate penitence here, which I have a feeling that it's minimally stronger than it was beforehand, as we squeeze in a Mind Blast to get another Void Shield proc. And yeah, you can see that Void Shield, if you are able to proc Void Shield a lot, it's very, very powerful. And now we have another Mind Blast Mind Blast available, and this is the problem I was referring to earlier. So when do I cast this Mind Blast now? If I cast it now, there's a reasonable possibility that someone will die. I try to squeeze it in now to get my next Void Shield rolling. So yeah, it's really a strategic decision about exactly when are you going to cast your Mind Blast, if it's available and everybody is dying. But yeah, you really have to get it in, because Void Shield is so powerful that you can't really skip it. But definitely a bit of a problematic situation, as I get stunned here from the AoE. And once again, Mind Blast's available, trying to squeeze it in before someone dies. And yeah, we do manage to weather the storm, almost literally here. And I think Discipline Priest with the Mind Blast Void Shield interaction, you are quite capable of delivering some major healing when it's required, because you can always fall back on a lot of Shadowmend to carry you through the downtime between Void Shields. And you can see this was a relatively lengthy pull. I'm not quite sure if I entered the pull with full mana or not. And it was a very damage-intensive pull. But simply going by the idea of always prioritizing Shadowmend last and only casting it when the other rotation has broken down, because Penance is on cooldown, Void Shield is on cooldown, Mind Blast is on cooldown, and only then going into the mana-intensive Shadowmend, actually works quite well, as the tank is running through this Winter Square. This was such an awkward situation. This was really, I don't know. You can see I'm getting ensnared here by this prison inside of this harsh winter area, and you don't have line of sight outside of it, and you can't look inside of it if you're outside. So I'm essentially trapped with this mob, and I'm receiving some AoE damage, but I also can't get out. I have to damage the prison, which prison, which I find out now. But I'm also getting cast on by the mobs outside of it, and the prison always renews. I ping assist here, hoping that someone will realize that the healer is trapped inside of this area and can't really help. But the realization doesn't come, or comes too late, as I desperately try to damage the prison. But again, I get retargeted, so it's a new prison on me, and I just can't get out. And yeah, you can't dispel this prison with a movement, with a snare removal effect such as Fate. That's unfortunately not possible. As finally, I think they realized that they need to help me. Sorry. And we played this mob then in the end anyway, so I'm not really sure about the reasoning behind this pull. And I think if we had just played this dungeon more safely and without all these weird and too large pulls, which produce a lot of problems, then we would also have easily timed it. Because from a damage perspective and general gameplay perspective, I think the group was decent. I've seen much worse. And maybe the mage is a bit of a weak point here. So yeah, as we finish out this winter squall heading into the second boss of the dungeon, feels like we've been here for hours and still only on the second boss. But then again, to be fair, at this point, most of the dungeon has already been completed. Yeah, I think it will be interesting to see how Discipline Priests are going to fare in the next season. Yeah, we'll see how Void Weaver is going to stack up against Oracle. I haven't played Void Weaver in a while. I do plan on returning to the spec at some point as well. By the way, I'm making a career change soon in October, which will give me a lot more time for making WoW-related videos. So I'm really looking forward to that, because right now I don't have the time for it next to my consulting job. But I really want to devote more of my life to making content, because that's something I really enjoy. So that will also give me a lot more time to dive into all the different specs, all the different healers as well. I'm still missing a little bit of expertise on healers like Monk and Holy Priest and so on, and I really want to get guides out for all of them. But that being said, I think it will be very interesting to see how Discipline Priest fares in the next season, because I think we do have a major power gain to the spec in terms of the planability of Void Shield. Because currently, or in the current season, Void Shield is, it just happens to you, and then you essentially use it, because you can't cast your next penance, as you don't want to forsake a potential next Void Shield proc. Nowadays though, or next season, because you can have 2 Void Shields available, and then a Mind Blast on top of that, as mentioned in the beginning, the planning potential of Discipline Priest for actually reacting successfully to what the dungeon is throwing your way, or what you know the dungeon will be throwing your way, is potentially very, very powerful. So, and given the strength of the shields as well, and from my experience so far, the shields are quite powerful in the next season. I think there's a big potential for Discipline Priests to reclaim some of their former power. We'll have to see if the dungeon, if the healing profile is strong enough to handle high level keys without having to revert into the Shadowmend spam and running into mana problems that way. But if the base rotation is powerful enough to deal with the slower paced healing requirements that dungeons are throwing our way in the next season, and Discipline Priest being one of the most powerful healers when it comes to delivering slow ramping healing, then I think there's definitely the possibility for the spec to become one of the more meta specs again, with some drawbacks in terms of not being able to dispel disease, poisons and curses, which I think in the next season will be a bit of a drawback. Then again, I haven't tested all the dungeons yet, because the other new dungeons are only coming online in a later cycle of the PTR, so I'm not exactly sure anymore if the King's Rest and Temple of Sethralis and so on have strong requirements for poison dispels and curse dispels, and we'll see about that. But yeah, that could definitely hold Discipline Priests back. But all in all, I think the increased ability to plan out their healing has a lot of potential to really amplify the spec's power in the coming season. And yeah, to conclude, or begin with the concluding section, I'm not that opposed to the changes to Discipline Priest. The main problem is that Penance no longer applies Atonement. That's just super annoying. So Blizzard, if you're watching this, maybe think about that. It just makes the spell so much less interesting. beforehand you really had some real decisive element behind your penance usage. So you, on the one hand, you wanted to always use it for offensively for spreading Shadow Word Pain, because Shadow Word Pains are really important. Now that's not as important anymore, because Shadow Word Pain is now only Power of the Dark Side now and Atonement healing, but no longer Shadowmend procs. And at the same time, back in the day, you also had to juggle this offensive usage idea with the defensive usage idea of maintaining Atonement on all of your groups, all of your party members. You also wanted to make these targeting decisions, so it also made the rotation just more interesting. Okay, who has low Atonement durations remaining? Okay, let's target this player with the penance, next player with the Power Word Shield. And yeah, Power Word Shield usage now is also somewhat lower, so it's because you have so many Void Shield procs going around. So Power Word Shield as a single Atonement applicator is also not as prominent as it used to be beforehand. And nowadays, what do you have with penance now? Okay, you still want to spread Shadow Word Pain, hasn't changed that much, even though the priority of it is not as strong anymore. And defensive penance just somehow feels underwhelming. Yeah, because penance also doesn't do that much healing. Yeah, okay, the healing is decent, but you can see I cast it on the DK. It doesn't really do all that much, and it also doesn't apply Atonement then. So the defensive penance advantage over the offensive one is then a little bit of additional healing on the targeted player. And I think that's simply often not enough. So I think the new setup really incentivizes casting a lot of offensive penances, because the defensive ones have lost one of their main advantage. Not that I super dislike casting offensive penances. I actually think it's a lot of fun, but I do miss the component of being able to sort of plan my Atonement applications around penance usage. So that change makes the class a lot less fun to play. From a power perspective, yeah, it's also a decline in power, sure, but it's not the biggest of deals, but it just makes the class a lot less engaging, and I don't think it's a good idea to have this change in the game. Beyond that, however, I think the Void Shield changes, yeah, the class is more reliant on Void Shield now, and I see a lot of other creators as well really disliking that. But I think it's not the worst thing in the world to have a really powerful ability which you can now deterministically, more or less, anticipate and plan out, and then deliver this power in pre-planned time windows. I think that's the making of a good class more than it's the making of a bad one. But let me know what you think about it, of course. I'm interested to hear other opinions, and yeah, we also have to see how it plays out in terms of power. If you really do decline into having to spam Shadowmends, then yeah, the class might not feel so good to play. There's also an argument to be made on whether Shadowmend is even necessary. That's something I want to try out as well. I think because they invented the whole new talents around it and changed everything around, it will be tuned in such a way that you should use Shadowmend more likely than not. But given that your other abilities are also quite powerful, then maybe you can also just go more into the sort of penance talent nodes at the end, increasing the power of penance further, increasing your holy damage as well. Will also be interesting to see if we are still going to go a bit of the shadow route, or if the diminished importance of Shadow Word Pain will now also mean that Shadow Word Pain is not as strongly integrated with the talent node. Although I would very much dislike seeing that. I think the spreading of Shadow Word Pain, the juggling of the offensive penance, and the Shadow Word Pain applications to as many targets as possible is one of the main selling points of Priests in terms of the fun, as I almost forget here to run in behind the shield. But I'm not the only one, so good for me. But yeah, we'll see. where Discipline Priest is headed in terms of its fun of the gameplay as well as its power. But I, for one, am reasonably happy with what they have done to the spec. And I know that's probably an unpopular opinion, but I quite like the ability to really be engaged with what I'm doing. And if the penance problem was removed, then that would even more so be the case. Because previously it could feel a lot as though you were just sort of running your rotation, and that healing was then either enough or it wasn't enough to deal with the damage events. And nowadays it's a little bit different. Nowadays you have your rotation, sure, but you can also plan your rotation much more effectively, and that's something that I do quite enjoy. Yeah, so on this channel this is a new channel, as you can see, and on it we will be looking a lot more deeply at these kind of gameplay commentaries. A little bit rusty on it, to be honest, but still, if you like it, please give the video a like, and you can also help me out a lot by dropping a subscription, because I'm obviously trying to get this channel monetized at some point in the future to incentivize me to doing more videos like this one, but definitely more coming, probably mostly starting in October-ish. I will do some before that, but in October then I will really have the time for it. And yeah, this channel will be sort of, it won't only be commentary, but it will also be a lot of videos about individual classes, which are not flagship guides, but just some evaluations about classes, which don't really find their way onto the main channel, because I don't want to talk, make a big video only about Mistweaver Monk or so on the main channel, unless it's a guide, because I think that's just not interesting for a core part of the audience, because many players just play one healer and then want to see content about that healer. So the main channel will be more about aggregate healer analysis and big flagship guides. Yeah. Anyway, that being said, let me know what you think about Discipline Priest. Probably a video that has the potential to gather a lot of dislikes, especially because of the verdict. I don't think Discipline Priests are that poorly off, or as poorly off as people make them out to be. I, for one, had a lot of fun playing the spec so far. And maybe this opinion changes, maybe it doesn't. We'll get to see it in the future. Thank you very much for watching, and see you soon.